welcome back, and the subject I'll be addressing today is dare to believe, what if Jesus defeats death? What if that really happened? C.S. Lewis, you may have heard of, he's the guy who wrote the Narnia stories that have been turned into the slightly naff films. He wrote those. He was once asked to address people as an academic speaker, and he began his talk like this. I don't know who any of you are, I don't know where you come from, I don't know what you do, but I do know this. All of you will die. Now, I don't know how that went down, or whether he got invited back, or not. It's a slightly depressing thought, but it is difficult to argue, as a thought. It is a certainty about us. All of us face death. And today we're asking the question, what if Jesus defeats death? Of course, different worldviews around have different ideas of what happens to you when you die. So if you're an atheist, then you think that you're just atoms, and that your atoms will decompose and you'll end up as carbon dioxide, mostly, and that's all. If you're a Hindu, you'll believe in reincarnation. You'll believe that there's a cycle round, you'll come back as something else, either better or worse, depending on how you've performed this time round. If you're a Buddhist, you'll be aiming for nirvana, for being swallowed up in the nothingness. That is your ultimate aim. If you're a Muslim, you'll believe in the judgment day, as we talked about yesterday. If you're a Christian, or if you follow the claim of Jesus and decide that it's true, you believe that there is a resurrection to come. And all of us who've ever lived, and everyone who's ever died, will be risen from the dead for Judgment Day. And the Christian claim that that's the case, rests on what happened to Jesus after he was crucified under the reign of Pontius Pilate in the 1st century. What if Jesus defeated death? Now, someone asked yesterday, very insightful question, can you take the ethics of Jesus, the good moral ideas of Jesus, his teaching, without taking what he says about God? And I said yesterday you can't do that. And actually I want to say the same today. Actually, the resurrection is not an optional extra idea for some Christians, if you like resurrections. Actually, the resurrection is the truth on which Christianity stands or falls. One of Jesus' first followers, the Apostle Paul, he wrote to the early Christians in Corinth, if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. In other words, if this claim about Jesus is untrue, then the Christian Union is wasting its time, they're believing in something that's a lie, and he goes on to say, actually, you should pity them more than anything else. Or maybe you already do, thanks for coming if you pity us. But Christianity stands or falls on the resurrection of Jesus. And what I want to do today is, as we've done each of these lunchtimes, is to look at one of the eyewitnesses of Jesus' life, and to see what he has to say about the resurrection, and what evidence he has to offer us for it. Firstly, we'll do that. Then for the second part of the talk, I'm going to ask the question, so what? If Jesus did rise from the dead, why did that matter? So firstly, the claim that Jesus did rise from the dead, but I want to start a step back from that, and to convince you that Jesus really died. Jesus really died. At that point, incidentally, Christianity and Islam come head to head. Just worth saying is that there is a philosophy around today, isn't there, that says that every religion can be true for different people. So, you're a Christian, I'm glad that's true for you. I'm a Muslim, well, that's true for me. You're an atheist, that's true for you. You have your truth, I have mine. And we can all be right. So I want to say that on this point of Jesus' death, there is a clash between two of the major religions of the world. Because Islam says Jesus was a prophet of God and did not die on the cross. They believe there was a case of mistaken identity and Judas Iscariot was crucified instead. Whereas the Bible says, Christians say that Jesus did die. That's right at the heart of the Christian faith, as we saw yesterday. It seems clear to me that Jesus either died or didn't die. But certainly not both. As you look into different religions, I don't think we can say these are all the same. They're not saying the same things about history. They're not saying the same things about reality. You've got to ask yourself which one, if either, is correct. And the first thing I want to share with you today is that Jesus really died. And you can see that if you take one of these Mark's Gospels on your tables. Please take this away with you, by the way, if you've never read one of the accounts of Jesus' life for yourself. Take them absolutely free. But for now, I want us to turn to the end of the account on page 51. Page 51. We looked yesterday at Jesus' death and why it matters. But let's pick up the account in verse 37. It's about halfway down the right-hand column of page 51. Jesus shouted and then he died. Once the curtain of the temple tore in two from top to bottom. A Roman army officer was standing in front of Jesus. When the officer saw how Jesus died, he said, "This man really was the Son of God." Some women were looking on from a distance. They come with Jesus to Jerusalem, but even before this they'd been his followers and had helped him while he was in Galilee. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of the younger James and Joseph were two of these women. Salome was also one of them. It was now evening before the Sabbath, and the Jewish people were getting ready for that sacred day. A man named Joseph from Arimathea was brave enough to ask Pilate for the body of Jesus. Joseph was a highly respected member of the Jewish council, and he was also waiting for God's kingdom to come. Pilate was surprised to hear that Jesus was already dead, and he called in the army officer to find out if Jesus had been dead very long. After the officer told him, Pilate let Joseph have Jesus' body. Joseph bought a linen cloth and took the body down from the cross. He had it wrapped in the cloth, he put it in a tomb that had been cut into solid rock, then he rolled a big stone against the entrance to the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph were watching and saw where the body was placed. Jesus was really dead. In other words, the resurrection wasn't a case of Jesus kind of passing out while he was being crucified and losing consciousness and then being revived somehow while in the cool of the tomb and struggling out and bandaging up his wounds and convincing his disciples that somehow he'd performed a miracle. Jesus was really dead on the cross. And Mark is very keen for us to know that, and so he records various witnesses who testify that Jesus died. There's three groups of them. The first ones are the women. So women were looking on from a distance. They come with Jesus to Jerusalem. Women who followed Jesus, women who loved Jesus, and watched him die. Those same women who watched him die, we're told, watched him buried. They saw him dead and buried in this stone-cut tomb. Witness number one, the Christians, followers of Jesus, saw that he died. Witness number two, Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Jewish council. Now this is very significant because the Jews, remember, they were the ones who had condemned Jesus to death. The Sanhedrin had decided that Jesus should be executed. And one of their number, one of the high council of Judaism, watched him die. In fact, he was something of a fan of Jesus. He stood apart from the crowd and boldly went to the Roman governor asking whether he could have the body because he wanted to give Jesus a dignified burial. Executed as a criminal, but this man wanted to give Jesus a burial of some honour. And so he asked for the body. And we're told that he handled the body of Jesus for some time. He brought a linen cloth, he took the body from the cross, he had it wrapped in the cloth, he put it into a tomb that had been cut into solid rock. He rolled a big stone against the entrance to the tomb. Here's a man who handles the corpse, who takes the corpse down from the cross and bleeding, who spends time wrapping it in the burial cloths, who carries the body into the tomb, and who seals it. It's an obvious point really, but one of my friends mentioned this to me. He said, the one thing that you don't do if you're a supporter of somebody and a fan of somebody is bury them unless you're sure they're dead. That's great at this point, but it's a good point, isn't it? Here is a man who has every opportunity to check. He handles the corpse. He wraps the corpse in linen. He carries the corpse to the tomb. Had there been any shallow breathing, any signs of life, this man would be in a position to know. The one thing you don't do with somebody that you support is bury them unless you're sure they're dead. And Joseph is sure he's dead. So the disciples are sure. This highly respected member of the Jewish council is sure. And the third witness is Pilate, the Roman governor. He's sure. He checks, actually. Pilate was surprised to hear that Jesus was already dead. So he checks. He calls in the army officer, the centurion, and says, how long has he been dead? And when he's satisfied, he says, okay, you can bury him. You see, Jesus had died under great controversy. And the Roman governor wants to be absolutely sure. And so he summons in the executioner, for whom it was more than his life's worth to get this kind of thing wrong. When summoned in by the dictator who runs the whole region. Is he really dead? Yes, sir, he's dead. He checks. 3 witnesses to assure us that Jesus really died. Well, that much, I guess, is fairly uncontroversial. Everyone dies in the end. Jesus died on a cross. But not only really dead, but then Mark wants us to know Jesus was really alive. And again, he shows us this in a way that is designed to answer our doubts and convince us that this really happened. Just look down at the beginning of chapter 16, page 52. After the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene, Salome, Mary the mother of James, bought some spices to put on Jesus' body. Very early on Sunday morning, just as the sun was coming up, they went to the tomb. On their way, they were asking one another, who will roll the stone away from the entrance for us? But when they looked, they saw that the stone had already been rolled away, and it was a huge stone. The women went into the tomb, and on the right side, they saw a young man in a white robe sitting there. They were alarmed. The man said, don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus from Nazareth, who was nailed to a cross. God has raised him to life. He is not here. You can see the place where they put his body. Now go and tell his disciples, and especially Peter, that he'll go ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there, just as he told you. When the woman ran from the tomb, they were confused and shaking all over. They were too afraid to tell anyone what had happened. Well, 2 pieces of evidence for Jesus' resurrection here. Firstly, the tomb was empty. They get to the tomb, the place where Jesus was buried, and he's not there. An empty tomb. I think that's very significant. And just a couple of objections to answer as we look at this. Sometimes people say, well, what if they went to the wrong tomb? The whole of Christianity got started just because someone got confused about directions, and rather than going to Jesus' tomb with a body in it, they went to an empty one that hadn't yet been used, and they said, oh, there's no one here. Hooray, Jesus is risen. What if they went to the wrong tomb? Well, it's fairly obvious, I think, that's nonsense. For one thing, surely eventually they discovered which the right tomb was, especially since the Roman centurion was involved in supervising the burial. The opponents of Christianity only had to produce a corpse, and it would stamp out the early Christian movement like nothing else. You say Jesus is alive, well, here he is. That would be the end of the whole thing. But actually, Mark records for us very carefully that the witnesses for his death were the same as the witness for his burial, were the same as the witnesses for the empty tomb. I don't know if you notice that. He says at the bottom of page 51, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of the younger of James and of Joseph were 2 of the women. Salome was one of the third. They watched him die. Then look at down the bottom of the column, page 52. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Joseph, were watching and saw where the body was placed. And then the next column, after the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene, Salome, Mary the mother of James, bought some spices to put on Jesus' body. The same people saw the execution and saw the burial, and were the ones on the scene to see the tomb empty. And they were women. I mentioned this on Monday. This is not something you make up. If you want to convince people in the first century that Jesus rose from the dead, don't make up a story where women are the witnesses. For the simple fact that in that culture, sexist as it was in this respect, women's testimony was not considered valid in establishing a point of testimony. And the only reason that you'd have women as the witnesses in your account is if women were the witnesses. But these women, they watched him die, they watched him buried, and they found the tomb empty. Notice as well, sometimes people say, oh, it was just wishful thinking. This was what the disciples wanted to believe, and so they kind of constructed this story about Jesus being risen. But notice again, that the account completely contradicts that. Why were they going to the tomb on the Sunday morning? Not to find a resurrected Jesus, but to take spices to put on his body. Basically, to understand this, we need to understand a bit about Jewish culture. The Jewish Sabbath, the special holy day on Saturday, was a day of rest. You weren't to do any work, and so all the shops were closed on Saturdays. And Sabbath began at nightfall on Friday night. So Jesus was killed on Friday. At night fell, all the shops were closed. Too late then to buy spices. You ought to have bargained, you can't now, shops are closed. You've got to wait until the end of the Sabbath. Well, the end of the Sabbath is nightfall on the Saturday. You go to the spices shop, you buy your spices, and you go at first light to the tomb Sunday morning. Why are they going to the tomb? To put spices on a dead body. It's like to put flowers on a grave. That's why they go. And it's a slightly irrational trip because they're on the way, and then even as they're going there, they suddenly think, oh, there's that massive stone. Oh, who will roll that away from us? They haven't thought it through in the way that grieving people don't always think things through. Just an impulse of affection and love to honour one that they loved, who was now dead. By the way, on the stone, I've seen some of these when I was on holiday in Israel. The way they did it, rich people could afford stone-cut tombs, and they had a stone that was kind of in a groove on a slope. So a big round stone in a groove cut down to cover the entrance on a slope. And the idea was it's pretty easy to seal the tomb. You just push and it starts rolling. But you need to overcome the force of gravity times how many tons this stone is to unseal it again. And I've got a photo that I took while on this holiday. One of my friends in the tomb and me like pretending to push it. But I didn't lean very hard because if it had sealed up, that would have been quite a disaster. You need a hydraulic lift or something to get the thing apart. And they haven't thought this through. How can we get into this sealed tomb to find a body that's dead, to put a spice onto on it? They weren't expecting it to be empty. And this account doesn't have the kind of fairy tale nature of people who are always expecting this to be a triumph. How would you expect an account to go for people who are expecting a resurrection? And so they went on a Sunday morning thinking, by now he should have defeated death. Let's go to the tomb to meet him, they say as they go along. The stone will be rolled away. Here he is. Oh, brilliant. There's an angel here to explain that he's not here. Fantastic. Hello, angel. Yes, he's alive. Let's start celebrating. Something like that. But what do you find? They go to the tomb, they're confused. They meet an angel, they're terrified. They run away, too afraid to tell anyone. And by the way, that is the end of Mark's Gospel. You'll see the next bit says one old ending. There were some extra bits that people tried to add to it, because it ends so starkly. The end of Mark's Gospel, they were too afraid to tell anyone what had happened. Full stop. That is not how I would choose to make up a story that ends in triumph. But it is how you might end an account that records history. Because this is exactly the kind of reaction that I think you would find if you go to just imagine your grandma's dead, you go to the funeral, you love your grandma, so 2 days later you buy some flowers to take to her graveside. And when you get to her graveside, you find a big hole in the ground, and an angel says, your grandma's not here, she's been resurrected, and she'll meet you back at home. I imagine you would be very, very scared. And what an extraordinary thing. You see, some people think, these were credulous people. They didn't understand the laws of biology. They believed in resurrection easily. They didn't understand science as we did. I don't think that makes sense to this account. See, they were not expecting resurrections any more than we are. Which is why when they heard about it, they were terrified. A tomb that's empty, the right tomb, the massive stone's been rolled away somehow without hydraulics. The women can see that it's empty, they go and look for themselves. No one produces the body to contradict the claims of the Christians, as any opponent would be sure to do. And they run away terrified, because resurrection was one thing they did not expect. The empty tomb. Piece of evidence too, much more briefly. They go on to meet Jesus. You see there's a hint of that in verse 7, bottom of page 52. Now go and tell his disciples, and especially Peter, that he will go ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there, just as he told you. And the rest of the New Testament records in some detail the various encounters that Jesus had with his disciples and with others as a resurrected person. He appeared to them at different times, in different groups, on different occasions. They knew he wasn't a ghost because they watched him eat stuff, and the stuff he ate disappeared. I don't know how a ghost eats something. They get some fish and it presumably just drops to the floor and there's the fish. But Jesus eats fish and it disappears. When he walks out the room, it goes with him. He's really physical. Thomas, you remember he's called Doubting Thomas. He said, I can't believe in a resurrection unless I see for myself. Unless I touch him and know that he's real. Unless I put my hands in the marks where the nails were at the crucifixion and I know it's him. And Thomas gets to do that. He gets to check. Jesus appeared to them. He was physical. He could be touched. He could eat stuff. He was alive. Jesus really died. Jesus was really risen. Now, just at this point, I want to say something. I think that we have a barrier to believing this, or two possible barriers you might have. One barrier is that you already have an ideology that precludes resurrection. Maybe you're an atheist, and you've already decided, whatever the evidence is, that resurrections cannot happen, because we're in a world of only atoms, there's no God, and this is impossible. If you have a kind of closed-minded, blind faith in atheism like that, I can't convince you. Because whatever I say, you're going to say, no, I've already decided. My faith prevents it. Now, that's one barrier to you, perhaps, and there's not much I can do. What I invite you to do is to be open-minded enough just to the possibility that there might be such a God as made us, such a God as runs the universe, who controls the laws of biology. He might just have the power to do such an extraordinary thing. I think the other barrier that many of us have is that we can't check this ourselves. It happened in history, and I can't see it. If there's a resurrection, I want to be sure. I want to be there myself. I want to do it again in my laboratory, and we can't do that because it happened in the past. But I want to say to you, even though we can't check it, these people could. And let me just explain what I mean by that. These people, these women, Peter, the early apostles, we might not be in a position to know, but they were in a position to know. They knew whether it was a made-up thing or a real thing. And I want to say, I think we've every reason to trust what they say because of the sacrifices that they go on to make for their claim it's true. See, they weren't expecting a resurrection, but they go on to proclaim in the capital city of the land that Jesus rose from the dead. They proclaim it in the face of those who'd executed Jesus. They proclaim it when flogged and beaten and told to be silent. They proclaim it even when going to martyrdom. See, they had a lot at stake if it wasn't true. And they were in a position to know. See, I can't check it. But these people could. It seemed to be pretty obvious that the early Christians were convinced that Jesus rose from the dead. Otherwise, they'd never have made the sacrifices they did. And it also seems pretty clear to me that the early Christians were in a position to know whether Jesus rose from the dead. The tomb was empty. They saw it for themselves. And Jesus was alive. They saw him for themselves. Jesus was really dead. Jesus was really alive. But lastly and finally, so what? So what? Yeah, amazing thing that happened in history, just a quirk of history. What difference does it make to my life now? Well, very quickly, three things. Three massive implications of the resurrection of Jesus. Firstly, it means that he can get us through death. Death is not the end for the Christian. The Christian who believes in life after death isn't just wishfully hoping for something that they'd like to be true. Well, I'd love to believe he's gone to a better place. No, for Christians, resurrection of the dead is it's an established fact. If Jesus got through death, he can get me through death. Actually, all the way through Mark's Gospel, Jesus has been explaining to his followers that he has the power over death, power to defeat death, power to raise the dead. And here he proves it. One of my friends gives the analogy of his BCG injection when he was at school. I think that shows his age or my age. I think he had MMR, something like that, or whatever it was, the kind of vaccination against TB and all the rest of it at school. He said he was terrified of injections. Quite a big bloke, rugby player, terrified of needles. And so he was in the queue outside the school nurse's office, and he said to himself, as he was kind of trembling, he said, look, be rational, be rational. And he was watching this guy, this kind of nerdy, weedy guy, in front of him in the queue, and said, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to watch what happens to him. Because if he can get through this, with little nerd that he is, I can get through it as well as I am. Okay, so he watches this guy, and the guy goes into the nurse's office, the door closed, he listens carefully, no blood-curdling screams. Good sign. He looks down at the door, there's no pool of blood seeping under the door, gratifyingly, and then suddenly the door opens, the guy comes out, smiling. And he thinks to himself, he got through, I can get through. See, this is a terrifying thing. It's an unknown thing. And what naive wishful thinking it would be to believe in a heaven just because it was a nice idea. But if Jesus has got through death, and that's a point of history, then he can get us through. First implication, if Jesus beat death, he can get you through death. Second implication, if Jesus resurrected, then he is God's king and the judge of the whole world. If Jesus has been resurrected, then he is God's king and the judge of all the whole world. We're going to look at this a bit more tomorrow when we ask the question, what if your eternity depends on it? But earlier in Mark's account, Jesus says that he is the Son of Man, that's a title for God's long-promised king, who will judge every nation of the world. Everyone who's ever lived, everyone who's ever died will be resurrected on that last day, and Jesus will decide where they spend eternity. And the proof of that is the resurrection. If the atheists are right, then we die and we rot, and that's it. There's no day of accounting. You've nothing to fear beyond stuff that might happen to you during your lifetime. But if Jesus is right, then death isn't the end. And we die and we're resurrected and we face him on his judgment throne. And suddenly questions of eternity become the most important questions anyone can ask. If Jesus rose from the dead, he is God's king who will judge the world. Second implication. Thirdly, if Jesus rose from the dead, he offers second chances to those who turn to him for forgiveness. If Jesus rose from the dead, he offers second chances to those who turn to him for forgiveness. If you've been following these talks over the last lunchtimes, you know that on Tuesday we saw that we have a massive problem, a problem that we cannot fix, a problem of the evil that is within our hearts. If you were here yesterday, you'll know that Jesus offered forgiveness through his death, cleansing by God from the problem that's within us. Well, I want to say today the same thing, that the resurrection guarantees second chances for those who turn to Jesus for forgiveness. And actually this is illustrated in the story of Peter. Peter, one of Jesus' closest friends. Peter, who loved Jesus and followed Jesus, and had said to him, Jesus, I'm never going to let you down. I'll stick with you through thick and thin. But Peter, who maybe you remember the story, you can read it if you don't remember it. Peter, who, when Jesus was being on trial, being questioned, Peter outside in the courtyard, interviewed by a servant girl, called down curses upon himself, saying, I don't know Jesus. I do not know this man of whom you speak. Peter, who before the cock crowed twice, denied Jesus 3 times. It's a really tragic picture of betrayal of a close friend, of regret as he breaks down in tears, of if onlys, if onlys. But the wonderful truth about the resurrection is that Peter gets a second chance. And Jesus, who died, has risen from the dead and wants forgiveness to go to Peter. And these are some of my favourite words in the whole of Mark's Gospel. Read it yourself, you'll find your own favourite bit, but this is mine, I think. Verse 7, bottom of page 52, right-hand column. Go tell his disciples, and especially Peter, that he'll go ahead of you to Galilee. You'll see him there, just as he told you. I love that Peter is the one singled out. He could have just said, go and tell the disciples Jesus is risen from the dead. But instead he says, go and tell the disciples, and especially Peter. Peter, the one who's full of tears and regret, and he thinks he'll never get a chance again to make things right with the God that he let down. Go and tell Peter he's got a second chance. Jesus is back from the dead. Jesus wants to meet him. Jesus forgives him. Resurrection means that new life is a possibility for anyone here who wants a second chance with God. Jesus really died. Jesus really rose again. And it really matters. He can get you through death. There is a judgment day where he as God's King will decide our eternity. And there is forgiveness and second chances for all who trust in him. Thanks so much for listening. I'm going to hand back over to Charlie, who'll explain what happens next.
Guys, before we take questions, may I ask you to take a look down in front of you. You'll see a feedback form. Please take a moment now to fill that out with the pens in front of you. We really value your feedback. We'd like you to be honest. It's got comments, anything about the location, publicity, the talk itself. Then you obviously name, email, mobile is self-explanatory, and then if you're in a hall, please put that down. Then you might want to tick to one or two boxes or both boxes. I would like to know more about what I've heard today. Please tick that if you'd like to hear more. Or please tell me more about the upcoming Christianity Explored course. This is a 5-week course happening next Tuesday, starting up next Tuesday evening in Bar Humbug on White Ladies Road. I think it's 7:45 for 8 o'clock, a chance to hear more about the Christian faith in a relaxed and informal environment as a thinking adult. So yeah, please do fill that out. Andrew, do you want to come back and answer some questions? Brilliant. So, a couple of questions here. Why does God want people to believe in him?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the amazing thing, we talked about this actually on the science talk yesterday, as we're comparing the view of atheism, which says that the world is only matter and chance, that's all we are, and the Christian view, which says that there is a God who made the world and everything in it. And we saw in that part of the Bible we looked at last night that extraordinarily, God made the world with a purpose in mind. He made humanity with a purpose, namely, to know him. He said he made us, he determined the places we should live, that we might seek out, reach out for him, and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. The extraordinary claim of the Christian faith is that this world is not just here by accident, it's here by the design of a God who wants to know you. Now, for me, that was an absolutely mind-blowing thought. When I was an atheist as a student, I was looking into Christianity. The idea that the intelligence, the cosmic powerful being behind this world, if there was such a thing, I thought he would be some kind of force or distant principle or kind of aloof power. But the idea that the personal God who made this world did so with the intention of knowing me personally and me being in relationship with him. The Bible says that is God's plan for the world. That's why the universe is here. That's why we're here. To know the God who made us. And that is why to fail to love God, to live in your life without reference to God, is the biggest tragedy there could ever be. The biggest waste of a human life you could ever have. But it's also why to experience forgiveness from that God, to come back into a relationship with him, is the greatest joy, the greatest fulfillment, the greatest meaning of what it is to be truly human that we could ever find. So a brilliant question. God wants us to know him. That is why Jesus came and died and rose again. And why the Christian Union is saying to you today, come to him, trust in him, and find life with God.
Right. There's another question on here.
Any from the gentleman else on the floor, please?
Well, you can, I've got 3 here.
Okay, so stick on hand if you want to jump, otherwise we'll go through the phone.
I think in your talk you mentioned old endings of the Gospel.
Yeah, thank you.
It says, what does that mean? And who wrote them? Can't they be seen as alternative or add-on endings made up to make us believe the story?
Thank you very much, yeah. So this is a question about the manuscript evidence for the New Testament. So we don't have the original copy of what Mark wrote. It's a very long time ago, and the documents were decomposed by now. But we do have hundreds and hundreds of copies dating back very, very early to what was written by the apostles. And actually the manuscript evidence is extraordinarily good. And let me explain why, and then I'll explain about how this ending fits in. Basically, some people say, what if it got changed by Chinese whiskers? You know, someone wrote something and then it gradually evolved as it was copied and changed and developed. That cannot have happened for this reason. Mark writes an original, and it is a very, very important account. It's an account about how this guy Jesus died and rose from the dead. It's of sensational importance. And so people say, I want a copy of what the eyewitnesses said. Can I copy that, please? Yes, certainly. And so someone copies it, and they take it off to Syria. Because as people begin to become Christians in Syria, they want a copy of this. Someone else copies it, they translate it to Coptic, they take it off to Egypt. And the Egyptians have a copy. Someone else copies it, they translate it into Latin, so that people in the West have a copy. And all these copies start going off in different directions, get translated into different languages, and then we have thousands of manuscripts. But by the time it's got copied and sent off in different directions, it's too late to change it. So imagine, I were to write a message on the board, you were to copy it, and one of you posts it to your auntie in Canada. Someone else drives off to it with Newcastle and starts looking there. And once it's gone off in different directions, it's too late to change it. I could maybe change one of the copies. I could chase you to Newcastle and hunt down your car and say, no. But it's already too late for the copy that's gone off to Canada in the post and the one that's gone over the channel to France. And once it's starting to spread, it's too late to change it. And so there's a whole science called textual criticism, where people compare all the different manuscripts with each other, some from Alexandria, some from Coptic, some from Syriac. They compare them all and say, do these match up? If they match up, we know what the original was. Because they must all stem from the same original. Too late to change it. Now there's a couple of places where we're not quite sure, where it looks like there were copying errors, and someone added something or someone spelt something wrong. The great thing about it is that the Bible, modern printed Bibles, are very honest about that, and they always tell you. So if you buy a Bible in the shop, you look at the footnote, it will say some manuscripts vary on this point. We're not quite sure. And they are on details like, is the place where Jesus was in Mark chapter 5 called Bethsaida or Bethesda? Chapter 6, sorry. Or is place in chapter 5 called the Gerasenes or the Gerasenes? We're not quite sure about the spelling. But the manuscripts don't vary on things like, was the tomb empty? Was Jesus really dead? Did he really do this miracle? Was it in this place? There are very small differences, and modern Bibles are honest about them. This is one such case. So it says one old ending, it's an extra ending that's been added. It's not around in the early manuscript, someone added it later. I think because the ending was so abrupt. The gospel that ends with everyone being terrified and running away, it's a bit abrupt. And so actually someone's added some stuff that they can work out from the other accounts of Jesus, just to kind of round it off. But I would say to you, don't worry about those things. The Bible's are honest about them. And on most things, there's absolute kind of coincidence between the different manuscript traditions, and we can be absolutely sure what it said. It's a really good question.
Guys, I'm really sorry, we're going to have to stop there to get people off to lectures and grab some lunch. If you haven't been able to ask your question, please speak to one of us afterwards, or do ask for more information about the Christianity Explored course. Tomorrow, same time, there's another talk, the final one. What if your eternity depends on it? And tonight at 7:30 in the Student Union, there is the science talk again. What if do atheists make bad scientists? That's the one. If you'd be interested in coming along, do come along. Please put your feedback forms at the bottom of the back, and there's lunch outside. Take care, guys.